Hi, I'm KJ Scriven, and welcome to Strengthen Your Walk. We're continuing our conversation around worship. What is biblical worship? Well, in Leviticus chapter 1 through 7, it is described. There is this ritual in the Old Testament that Hebrews would do to worship God. Now, and it was very specific. For instance, they would worship in specific places, number one. Number two, they would worship with specific objects, whether it would be an altar or a tree or a stone. Number three, their worship was led by specific people, meaning a priest or a prophet. The worship was also done in specific ways, whether through sacrifice or through a ritual. Number five, worship was also done on specific days, festivals, holy days, or Sabbath. So this process was very, very, very specific. I've said that word specific a lot, right? It was very specific. And God would not necessarily be pleased with every sacrifice, right? It had to be done perfectly. But thank God for Jesus, for all of us. Jesus becomes the perfect sacrifice. He fills the gap for us. And we see this in Hebrews chapter 13. I'm going to read 10 through 16. Watch this here. Starting at verse 10, it says, we have an altar. You notice that word there? We're talking about sacrifice again. It keeps coming up. From which those who worship at the tabernacle do not have the right to eat. For the body of those animals whose blood is brought in the most holy place by the high priest, you notice that, as a sin offering are burned outside the camp. Therefore, Jesus also suffered outside the gate so that he may sanctify the people by his own blood. Let us then go to him outside the camp, bearing his disgrace. For we do not have an enduring city here. Instead, we seek the one to come. Therefore, you see that word again. Through him, let us continually offer up to God, watch this, a sacrifice of praise. That is the fruit of lips that confess his name and don't neglect to do what is good and to share. For God is pleased with such sacrifices. So we see here, Jesus becomes the perfect sacrifice for us. And he says now, instead of having to be in the perfect place at the perfect time with the perfect people, Jesus becomes the sacrifice. And now our worship is the sacrifice of the fruit of our lips. And he says, and don't neglect to do what is right and to do what is good. This is the type of worship that God is pleased with. When we confess him as Lord, as Savior, as our God, when we confess him with our mouths, when we worship him with our mouths, but also when we worship him with our lives. Thank you for joining us for Strengthen Your Walk.